All right, welcome back to ABA Exam Review and the continuation of our BCBA Task List series. Today we're continuing behavior change procedures with G21, promoting stimulus and response generalization. Generalization is a critical aspect of behavior change. If we're not generalizing, how can we be sure that our interventions are effective? We can plan as much as we want and teach as much as we want in controlled environments. But if the learner can't take what they've learned to other environments, then how can we be sure we're effective? So today we're going to briefly cover what is stimulus generalization, what is response generalization, and then we're going to talk about strategies we can use to systematically plan for generalization. As always, please subscribe for all of our updates. We post 3 times a week for BCBA questions. We also post RBT videos as well. Check out behavioranalyststudy.com for all of our study materials. When you pass, let us know so we can include you in the Sunday shout out. Work hard, study hard. Let's get going. So, generalization, arguably the most critical part of behavior change. Once again, if we're teaching something in a controlled environment, let's say a clinical setting, what good does it do for the learner to learn it in that setting if they cannot do it in the real world? And that's what the essence of generalization is, where we are teaching something and the client is able to take what they've learned to the real environment. Now, there are 2 main types of generalization: stimulus and response. With stimulus generalization, we have a response that occurs in the presence of more than one stimuli. And so, how this might look is you teach this stimuli to evoke this response. And then, as we go and we start to generalize, this stimuli and this stimulus start to evoke that same response. So, all of these stimuli are evoking the same response. So, we have one response occurring in the presence of more than one stimuli. Response generalization is kind of the opposite, where you have different responses occurring in the presence of the same stimuli. So again, we might teach this stimulus to evoke this response. And then as time goes by, our client starts to demonstrate that response and demonstrate that response in the presence of the stimulus. They're functionally equivalent responses. They might just look different. And so that is response generalization. So once again, when you think about stimulus generalization or response generalization, think about these tiny little graphics, right? You have stimulus generalization where you have all these stimuli evoking a single response. And then response generalization where you have a single stimulus evoking multiple types of functionally equivalent responses. Now, generalization doesn't just occur. We've got to plan for it and we have to promote it. We should always be planning and teaching and working towards generalization. We're going to cover 6 strategies that you need to know for generalization. The first is train loosely. Now, training loosely means we are going to vary non-critical aspects of the environment. And non-critical is the key word for training loosely. This means, excuse me, these are not the critical stimuli that the learner is relying on for their responses, meaning it's not the SD. What we want to avoid, or what we're trying to avoid by training loosely, is that some non-critical aspect of the environment starts to gain control over the behavior. So for instance, if you have a classroom, you want to change up the classroom every now and then. So posters or things on the shelves or the chairs or whatever it might be, you want to start changing up that environment every now and then so that things in the environment that shouldn't have control over the environment or the behavior don't gain control over the behavior. So that's training loosely. With training loosely, we're not focused on the critical stimuli or the response we're trying to teach. We're focused on the environment around us, which possibly could gain control of the behavior and what we want to prevent from gaining control of the behavior. And then we have indiscriminable contingencies. This is when the learner does not know when reinforcement will come. Why is this important? Well, in the natural environment, it's much more likely that reinforcement isn't going to be continuous and isn't going to be predictable. And so when we're teaching, we want the contingencies to not always be obvious. So how can we do that? Well, you can fade out reinforcement, you can thin schedules, and you can use variable schedules. As the learner learns, it's very important to go through and start increasing the effort for reinforcement or making it less predictable when reinforcement may come, because we want that learner to continue doing that response even if they don't know reinforcement's coming or if they know reinforcement isn't coming all the time. And then multiple exemplars. Multiple exemplars is when we practice using several different stimuli and response variations. What's the difference between training loosely and multiple exemplars? With training loosely, we're not focused on our critical stimuli and responses. We're focused more on the environment. Multiple exemplars, now we're actually teaching and using the stimuli we want to evoke certain responses, and we're going to teach those responses we want to see. So with multiple exemplars, we are actually using stimuli we want to evoke behavior, and we're teaching behaviors we want to see. You don't want behavior to become rote. The best example you can give here is when we're teaching, let's say, colors, and we're using color cards, blue, yellow, red, and you tell the client point to red, and they point to the red color card, and they do that for a month, and they learn to point to the red color card. Well, if you ask them to go find something in the room that is red, can they do that? If they can't, you have failed to generalize, and you should have used multiple exemplars. So consider that, and don't get training loosely in multiple exemplars confused. Now, 3 more. Program common stimuli. Programming common stimuli means the teaching setting should be similar to the generalized setting. So if I'm teaching a client to shop at a grocery store, and I have, let's say, a setting, I want to make that setting at home or in the clinic resemble a grocery store as much as reasonably possible. Obviously, there's going to be resource restraints. It's not always going to match one-to-one, but the more you can get your teaching setting to resemble the actual natural environment, the better off you're going to be. So how do we program common stimuli? So programming common stimuli kind of goes hand in hand with general case study. With a general case study, it's a systematic process that identifies teaching examples and stimuli from the generalized setting. So you should always start with that general case study. General case study, let's say we're using the grocery store example. You're going to go to the grocery store and you're going to look around, take notes, observe what does that environment look like? What are potential SDs? What are potential responses? What are potential barriers? What are potential reinforcement opportunities? Once you do that general case study, you can then program common stimuli into your environment. You can start to train multiple exemplars because you know what responses what responses you might want to see from the learner, or what might be required from them, what stimuli they might see at the store. And from there, you can build out a generalization plan. So you can see that generalization isn't something we hope for and wait for. It's very systematic and it's very, very planned for. And then finally, natural contingencies. This would be, hey, let's teach outside of the working environment, right? Let's go take them to the store. Or just whenever we're around, even if we're not, quote unquote, working, I can still use natural contingencies to reinforce generalization when it occurs. For example, when you're teaching communication, you should be using natural contingencies all the time because communication is something that has to happen everywhere and consistently. So always, always, always be teaching and be establishing contingencies, even if it isn't a planned, let's say, work time. Now, just a couple more things to remember about generalization. Generality is a dimension of ABA that just highlights the importance of generalization in our practice and in our field. We don't hope or wait for generalization. We plan for it in a systematic and data-driven way. We don't sit around, oh, I hope they generalize today, or they'll generalize tomorrow. I can feel it. We plan for it. We use these strategies to promote it. If we aren't generalizing behavior, how can your interventions be effective? It doesn't matter if you teach something extremely well in a clinical setting if it can't happen outside the clinical setting, because then what are we really accomplishing? And the systematic generalization should occur throughout your time with your client. From the beginning, we should be thinking, how can we generalize? Don't start mastering things out before you know that generalization has occurred. Thank you for watching. Check out behavioranalyststudy.com for all of our study materials. Please be sure to subscribe for all of our updates. When you pass your exam, let us know so we can include you in the Sunday shout out. Work hard, study hard. See you soon.